In a small southern town, where the golden haze of the setting sun bathed everything in a harmonious glow, life moved at its own steady pace. This was a place where everyone knew each other's business, and secrets rarely stayed hidden for long. It was here, on a quiet street named Isaac, that 16-year-old Sylvia lived with her family. Her father, Henry, was a man of few words, his days consumed by labor at the local auto repair shop. His weathered hands bore the marks of years of hard work, and his stern demeanor ensured no one dared cross him. Sylvia's mother, Adelina, was the quintessential homemaker, though her obsession with maintaining the family's reputation often overshadowed any warmth she might have shown. Sylvia herself felt almost invisible within her family. She spent her afternoons sketching under an old oak tree at the edge of town. Her drawings were windows into a world she could only dream of, a house filled with light, laughter, and love. Yet beneath the surface of her seemingly ordinary life, a storm brewed. A few months prior, Sylvia had met James, a charming boy from a neighboring town who spoke of escaping their small-town confines. For a time, his attention felt like a lifeline pulling her from the monotony of her existence. But their whirlwind romance was short-lived. When Sylvia told James she was pregnant, he vanished without a word, leaving her to face the fallout alone. That evening, as Sylvia clutched the crumpled remains of a positive pregnancy test in her room, her world unraveled further when Ellie, her 10-year-old sister, burst in without knocking. Ellie's wide eyes caught sight of the evidence before Sylvia could hide it, shattering her innocence in an instant. "What is that?" Ellie asked, her voice trembling. Sylvia tried to deflect, but it was no use. Ellie ran from the room, fear and confusion etched on her face. The confrontation with Adelina came swiftly and brutally. Standing in the doorway of the living room, Adelina held the test as if it were a weapon. "What is this, Sylvia?" Her voice cracked like a whip, filled with anger and shame. Each word cut deeper than the last. "You've ruined us. Do you know what people will say? How am I supposed to face them at church, at the grocery store? You've brought shame on this family." Henry, silent until now, finally spoke. Sitting on the edge of the couch, his hands clasped together, he looked at Sylvia with a coldness that froze her to her core. "You're no daughter of mine," he said, his voice low but resolute. Sylvia's heart shattered at those words, the final nail in the coffin of her childhood. The argument escalated into a full-blown fight between her parents. Adelina screamed at Henry for his perceived indifference, while he accused her of failing to control their daughter. Amidst the chaos, Sylvia stood frozen, tears streaming down her face, feeling like a bystander in her own life. The fight culminated with Adelina dragging Sylvia to the front door. Without another word, she shoved her outside into the cold night. The rain was coming down in sheets, drenching Sylvia within seconds. She turned back, pleading for her mother to let her in, but the door slammed shut in her face. Behind it, she could hear Ellie sobbing, her cries muffled but unmistakable. The world outside was dark and unwelcoming. Sylvia stood on the porch, shivering, her mind racing. Neighbors drawn by the commotion peered out from their windows or stood on their porches, their expressions a mix of curiosity and judgment. Whispers reached her ears, sharp and cutting. With nowhere else to go, Sylvia began to walk. The rain plastered her hair to her face and soaked through her clothes. Every step was heavy with despair, every breath a struggle against the sobs threatening to consume her. She thought of James, of the promises he had made and the dreams they had shared. She thought of her parents, of her sister, of the life she was leaving behind. But most of all, she thought of the tiny life growing inside her, a fragile spark of hope amidst the darkness. By the time the rain stopped, Sylvia found herself at the edge of town, the streetlights casting long shadows on the deserted road. She had no plan, no destination. All she knew was that she couldn't go back. The door to her old life was closed, and she was left standing on the threshold of an uncertain future. As the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, casting a pale glow on the drenched streets of the town she once called home, Sylvia sat on a bench in the deserted park at the town's edge. Shivering in her wet clothes, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, exhaustion overtook her. Sometime during the night, she fell into a fitful sleep, her mind haunted by the echoes of her mother's words and her father's cold stare. Morning brought no reprieve from the stares and whispers. As Sylvia walked through the town, the looks she received from passers-by were sharp with judgment, their hushed conversations hanging in the air like a heavy fog. A woman leaving the local bakery glanced at Sylvia's disheveled appearance, her long brown hair matted against her face, and quickly pulled her young daughter closer, as though proximity alone could taint them. Desperation drove Sylvia into a small convenience store. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and the hum of refrigerator units hit her as she stepped inside. She wandered the aisles, her eyes scanning for something to quell the gnawing hunger in her stomach. Picking up a sandwich and a bottle of water, her trembling hands clutching them like treasures, she approached the counter. The clerk, a middle-aged man with a gruff demeanor, eyed her suspiciously. "You got money for that?" he asked, his tone laced with disdain. Sylvia fumbled in her pockets, her face burning with humiliation. She stammered an apology and placed the items back on the shelf. As she turned to leave, the clerk muttered under his breath, loud enough for her to hear, "We don't need more charity cases around here." Outside the store, Sylvia leaned against the wall, her breath coming in shallow gasps, tears blurring her vision as she slid down to sit on the curb. The reality of her situation felt like a weight pressing down on her chest. Her gray hoodie, now soaked and clinging to her slight frame, offered little protection from the biting chill of the morning air. She couldn't survive like this, not alone. The hours passed in a blur of wandering and rejection, each encounter reinforcing the walls of the invisible prison she had been cast into. By evening, Sylvia found herself on the outskirts of town, her feet aching and her spirit nearly broken. The sun dipped below the horizon, and a bitter chill settled in the air. Sylvia came across a small weathered house at the end of a dirt road. The porch light flickered, casting a warm glow on the rickety steps. Hesitating, her hand hovered over the gate. She had no reason to believe the occupants would be any different from the others she had encountered that day, but the faint light seemed to call to her, a fragile beacon in the darkness. Before she could make a decision, the door opened, and an elderly woman stepped out. Her silver hair was tied back in a loose bun, and her sharp eyes scanned the horizon. Spotting Sylvia immediately, her expression unreadable for a moment, neither of them moved. "You just going to stand there, or are you coming in?" the woman finally said, her voice firm but not unkind. Sylvia's legs carried her forward before she could think to stop herself. Inside, the house was small but cozy, filled with the smell of something cooking on the stove. The woman motioned for Sylvia to sit at the kitchen table. Without a word, she ladled soup into a bowl and placed it in front of her. Sylvia hesitated, unsure if this kindness came with a price. "Eat," the woman said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Taking a tentative sip, the warmth of the soup spread through her, easing the chill that had settled in her bones. "My name's Dortha," the woman said, sitting across from her. "You look like you've been through hell." Sylvia nodded, her voice caught in her throat. She wanted to explain, but the words wouldn't come. Dortha didn't press her. Instead, she began to talk, her voice steady and soothing. She spoke of her life, of the hardships she had faced, of the family she had lost. Her stories were woven with pain and resilience, a testament to a life lived against the odds. For the first time since her world had fallen apart, Sylvia felt a flicker of hope. Dortha's home became Sylvia's refuge, a place where the sharp edges of the world couldn't reach her. Days turned into weeks, and Sylvia found herself learning from the older woman. Dortha taught her practical skills, how to sew, how to cook, how to stretch every dollar. But more than that, she taught Sylvia how to face the world with quiet strength. As the months passed, Sylvia's belly grew, a visible reminder of the life she carried. Dorothy stood by her through it all, offering wisdom and support without judgment. The neighbors weren't as kind. Whispers and pointed stares followed them whenever they went into town. One day, a man stopped Dorothy on the street and asked why she bothered with that girl. Dorothy's response was simple and firm: because someone has to. The bond between the two women deepened, built on trust and mutual understanding. Dorothy became the family Sylvia had lost, and Sylvia brought new life and purpose into the older woman's world. The night Sylvia went into labor was cold and clear. Dorothy moved with the precision of someone who had seen it all before, guiding Sylvia through the pain with steady hands and calming words. When the baby's cries filled the room, Sylvia felt a rush of emotions she couldn't name. Holding her daughter close, she marveled at the tiny perfect being in her arms. "Layla," Sylvia whispered. The name felt right, a symbol of the new beginning she so desperately needed. Dorothy stood beside her, a rare smile softening her features. "She's beautiful," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Dorothy's home became Sylvia's refuge, a place where the sharp edges of the world couldn't reach her. Days turned into weeks, and Sylvia found herself learning from the older woman. Dorothy taught her practical skills: how to sew, how to cook, how to stretch every dollar. But more than that, she taught Sylvia how to face the world with quiet strength. As the months passed, Sylvia's belly grew, a visible reminder of the life she carried. Dorothy stood by her through it all, offering wisdom and support without judgment. The neighbors weren't as kind. Whispers and pointed stares followed them whenever they went into town. One day, a man stopped Dorothy on the street and asked why she bothered with that girl. Dorothy's response was simple and firm: because someone has to. The bond between the two women deepened, built on trust and mutual understanding. Dorothy became the family Sylvia had lost, and Sylvia brought new life and purpose into the older woman's world. The night Sylvia went into labor was cold and clear. Dorothy moved with the precision of someone who had seen it all before, guiding Sylvia through the pain with steady hands and calming words. When the baby's cries filled the room, Sylvia felt a rush of emotions she couldn't name. Holding her daughter close, she marveled at the tiny perfect being in her arms. "Layla," Sylvia whispered. The name felt right, a symbol of the new beginning she so desperately needed. Dorothy stood beside her, a rare smile softening her features. "She's beautiful," she said, her voice thick with emotion. The first hint of the past creeping back into her life came on a crisp autumn morning. The bell above the cafe door jingled, and Sylvia looked up from the counter. Standing in the doorway was a figure she hadn't seen in over a decade: her mother, Adelina. The sight of her brought a rush of conflicting emotions. Sylvia froze, her mind racing. Adelina looked older, her once proud posture slightly hunched, her eyes lined with fatigue. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The cafe seemed to fall silent, the hum of conversation and clinking dishes fading into the background. "Hello, Sylvia," Adelina said finally, her voice hesitant. She held a small worn handbag in her hands, clutching it as though it were a lifeline. Sylvia's heart pounded. The years had done little to soften the memory of her mother's harsh words or the sting of being cast out. Yet seeing Adelina now, so frail and unsure, stirred something unexpected, a flicker of pity. "What are you doing here?" Sylvia's voice was steady, but the undercurrent of tension was unmistakable. Adelina hesitated, glancing around the cafe. I wanted to see you, to talk." Sylvia gestured toward an empty table near the window. "You can sit, but I'm not leaving my work." Adelina nodded and took the seat, her movements deliberate, as though afraid of breaking the fragile truce. Layla appeared from the back, carrying a tray of freshly baked cookies. She stopped mid-step when she saw the stranger at the table. "Mom, who's that?" she asked, her brow furrowing. Sylvia's throat tightened. "Layla, this is Adelina, my mother." The word felt foreign on her tongue, as though it didn't belong. Layla's eyes widened, darting between the two women. "Your mom." Sylvia cut her off with a shake of her head. "We'll talk later. Go finish the prep work in the kitchen." Layla hesitated but obeyed, leaving Sylvia and Adelina alone. Sylvia leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. "What do you want?" Adelina clasped her hands together, her knuckles white. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, Sylvia. I've made mistakes, terrible mistakes. But I've been alone for so long. Your father, he's gone now. And Ellie, she moved away, started her own life." Her voice broke, and for the first time, Sylvia saw her mother not as the imposing figure of her childhood, but as a woman weighed down by regret and loneliness. Still, the scars of the past ran deep. "You think you can just walk in here after all these years and say you're sorry?" Sylvia's voice was sharp, her pain bubbling to the surface. "Do you have any idea what you put me through? What it was like to be thrown out, to have nowhere to go?" Adelina flinched at her daughter's words. "I know. I can't undo what I did, but I'm trying, Sylvia. I'm trying to make things right." That evening, after closing the cafe, Sylvia sat with Layla in their small apartment above the shop. She recounted the events of her childhood, the good and the bad, and explained why she had kept her family's story hidden. Layla listened intently, her expression a mix of curiosity and sadness. "Do you think you'll ever forgive her?" she asked. Sylvia sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I don't know. Forgiveness isn't easy, but maybe it's not about her. Maybe it's about me." The weeks that followed saw Adelina continuing to visit the cafe. She sat quietly at her usual table, never pushing, never demanding. She seemed content just to be near Sylvia, to watch her daughter thrive in the life she had built. Slowly, cautiously, Sylvia allowed herself to engage in conversation, though the walls around her heart remained firmly in place. One day, Dortha stopped by the cafe. Her presence was as commanding as ever, despite her age. Noticing Adelina immediately, she raised an eyebrow. "Well, isn't this a surprise?" she said dryly. Sylvia chuckled nervously. "That's one way to put it." Dortha pulled Sylvia aside, her tone serious. "You've built something beautiful here, girl. Don't let old wounds steal your peace. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but it can set you free." Dortha's words lingered long after she left. That evening, as Sylvia closed up the cafe, she found herself standing outside Adelina's table. "Would you like to come upstairs for dinner?" she asked tentatively. Adelina looked up, her eyes wide with surprise. "I'd like that," she said softly. It wasn't a perfect resolution. There were still wounds to heal and words left unsaid. But it was a start, a fragile, tentative step toward reconciliation. As Sylvia watched her mother interact with Layla, sharing stories and laughter, she realized that forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past. It was about choosing to move forward, one small step at a time. The bond between them was fragile, but it was growing. Adelina's presence in their lives was no longer a source of tension, but a chance for healing. Over the following months, Sylvia and Adelina began to rebuild their relationship. They talked about the past, acknowledging the pain and misunderstandings that had driven them apart. Adelina admitted her mistakes, expressing remorse for the way she had treated Sylvia. In return, Sylvia shared her struggles, the sacrifices she had made to build a new life. Though the process was slow and sometimes painful, both women found solace in the connection they were rebuilding. Layla, too, played a role in bridging the gap. Curious and open-hearted, she sought to understand her grandmother, asking questions and listening intently to her stories. Through her, Sylvia and Adelina found common ground, united by their love for the same person. The cafe became a place where the three of them gathered, creating memories and forging a new kind of family dynamic. Sylvia often reflected on how far she had come. She thought about the stormy night when she was cast out, the long journey to find herself, and now, this moment of reconciliation. Life had taught her many lessons, but one stood out above all others. Holding on to anger only hurt herself. Forgiveness wasn't just for others. It was for her own peace of mind. Years later, Sylvia reflected on the journey she had taken. From the stormy night she was cast out to the life she had built with Layla and Dortha, and finally, to the reconciliation with her mother. She realized that life was a series of choices, each one shaping the person she became. Forgiveness had been one of those choices, not for Adelina's sake, but for her own peace. The cafe continued to thrive, a testament to Sylvia's resilience and determination. Its walls were adorned with paintings that told the story of her life, of loss, hope, and redemption. Regular customers became friends, and the community embraced her and her family. Sylvia knew that the past would always be a part of her, but it no longer defined her. She had chosen to move forward, embracing the present and looking toward the future with optimism. And so, Sylvia's story became a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is always the possibility of a new beginning. The scars of her past remained, but they served as reminders of how far she had come. Her relationship with Adelina was still fragile, but it was growing stronger with every shared moment. Layla, now a young woman, stood by her side, embodying the hope and strength Sylvia had fought so hard to preserve. One evening, as the golden hour bathed the cafe in warm light, Sylvia stood at the counter, watching her daughter interact with a group of regulars. For the first time in years, she felt truly whole. The storm had passed, leaving behind a calm she never thought possible. And though challenges lay ahead, Sylvia faced them with courage, knowing she wasn't alone anymore.
And that's where our story ends. What did you think of this story? Share your emotions in the comments below. We'd love to know what you remember most. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And if you are in the mood for another exciting story, check out our next video. It's waiting for you. Until then, stay curious, get inspired, and keep exploring the stories that make life extraordinary. See you in the next one.